Chapter 34. Ray groaned. She'd stopped to pick up some sports leggings en route to the Cavendish Sports Centre. They were too small and were now riding up her crutch. It was all she could think about. Their instructor was leading them through some warm-up stretches, and the deep lunge that Ray was struggling to hold had sent the seam of her stretchy outfit somewhere unbearable. Situated in the middle, Ray looked around at her old friends from the academy. They'd all advanced well beyond her, professionally and personally, and there was no chance of extracting this blasted thing without making a blatant grab at her nether regions. She gritted her teeth and felt sorry for her poor little conejo. The others stretched themselves with poise, and from the corner of her eye, Ray watched them wring their muscles out. This wasn't new to them. Gone were the boozy weekends in the city. No more carefree, impulsive nights at warehouse raves in St. Luke's. Gone the constant hunt for action. No. In the intervening years, this lot had been smart. They'd recognised when enough was enough. Their bodies had craved a healthy and predictable routine, and their minds had sought the safer grounds of family and a stable career path. Shrewd decisions made by reasonable folk. Ray hated them. From what she could gather, most of them kept in touch by training together during their sleep cycle programs, hooking up to bounce around some fantasy exercise regime while their bodies were tuned and toned as they slept. But today's fitness retreat was a proper reunion, in the flesh, so to speak. The problem was that Ray could neither afford to sleep cycle, nor could she be asked to do any proper exercise. So her flesh was in poor shape. The body-hugging sports kit she'd bought for the occasion revealed the telltale chub around her middle, and she was acutely aware of the chinsulation accumulating under her face. The instructor, a dude whose body fat percentage was so low he looked like he'd been skinned alive, switched to a crouching stretch that involved his knees and elbows bending and contorting around one another. The others followed him flawlessly as Ray fumbled into the tricky pose, dragging the ridge of lycra out of her groin as subtly as possible. "Hey, fun bags. Been a while? How you doing?" Lance lived down the corridor from her at the academy. The two of them had shared countless good times. Ray couldn't remember half of them, but good times nonetheless. Everyone agreed that she and Lance had been like brother and sister. Roles they'd fallen into easily, although neither would concede to being the youngest. "I am fucked," Ray grimaced. "Really, truly fucked. Are we nearly done?" "You're kidding." The look on her face told him otherwise. "Ray, that was the warm-up. We've only just started." "I had a feeling you might say that." "Haven't done much urban yoga, then?" "I love it. Sorts me out." The two of them hadn't seen each other for years, and Ray shook her head at how anxious she'd been. It was like no time had passed at all. Strange, she thought, how you can go so long yet still pick up the thread. Like all those months and years hadn't happened. Like you could somehow just hop over all that life you'd lived. Her fingers wandered towards her throat, and the smile froze on Ray's face. A cold dread seeped up and stopped her breath. With a blink, she was back in the cluster. Slick spates of blood in every direction, blanched faces, all staring at her. That sick gurgle. The panic. Perhaps you couldn't hop over everything. Okay, guys, come in, huddle. The instructor hailed them over his PA and gathered them in. Right, we're gonna head off in a mo, but before we do, I want us to take a minute to consider how we'll get to our first ashram. It's not far away, a few blocks, but let's see everyone get involved with their inner animal on the way. Nobody jogs, nobody walks. Okay, guys? Let's do this thing. The instructor crouched low and let his hands become heavy. His knuckles grazed the floor as he let out a guttural grunt that Ray supposed meant, "Follow me," in chimp speak. He pawed and hopped over the gym floor, monkey style, stopping to beckon them with an awkward wave that a monkey might do if it was doing an impression of a person waving. There was a collective intake of breath as the others steeled themselves and committed to the task. Then they too dropped low, bodies bending and hunching, a few grunts and hisses, a self-conscious meow, and they were off. Lance stopped and peered up at Ray, the back of his hand planted on his forehead, his fingers coned in a terrible approximation of a rhino horn. "Come on, you muppet," he said in a gruff voice. "We're all doing it. Nuff, nuff. You'll be fine." Crouching low, Ray stuck one hand on top of her head, fingers up, and the other under her chin, dangling down. Why, oh why, Ray wondered, had she chosen a turkey? Seriously. Philippa's inner animal was a panther. Still, she scuttled after Lance, making frantic "oo-loo-loo-loo-loo-loo-go-loo-loo-loo-loo" noises, and leaving her last scrap of her dignity behind. The ashram was the entrance lobby to a municipal car stack. Ray emitted a subdued turkey greeting to the others who'd already taken up various yoga poses which incorporated the urban environment. Lance was doing downward dog, with his forearms poking through the rails of a metal banister. In a small space, under the stairs, Philippa was on her back, thrusting her groin up in the air in a provocative bridge pose. In between the doors to the two elevators stood Martin, erect and unbearably smug, in a tree pose, his arms shooting straight up, mimicking the rectangular space between the elevators, a serene smile on his face. The instructor sat on some metal housing in a seated twist, every sinew of his fat-free muscle neatly defined and held in exquisite tension. He caught her eye. "Hey, Renee," he said, nodding at the corner. "See if there's room in the stairwell. Get creative." There were already a few others on the lower part of the stairwell, bent and contorted over the steps in a tapestry of lycra. Ray slipped around the corner, out of sight of the instructor, parked her arse on a step and brought up the latest episode of Curb Your Kangaroo on her eyeline. Utterly hilarious. Well, sometimes. Amusing, at least. There was a lot of daft editing and over-the-top graphics, and if you stop to think about it, the whole concept was pretty pathetic. The trick was not to think about it too much. Smart viewers were savvy about such things. By the time the credits were scrolling, the lobby was almost empty. Ray just caught up with the last two in the street. Rhys was swaying his head forward and backward, like, she guessed, an ungainly giraffe. Jemima was flapping her arms in slow, majestic strokes, but stopped once Ray joined them. "Hey!" Jemima was elated to see her. "There you are! God, it's been ages. How are you?" "Oh, yeah, just, come here, you." Rhys tucked her under his arm in a friendly clinch. "How are your clusters treating you, huh? God, I should really dip my toe back into a simulation soon. I haven't made an adjustment for ages. Running my own consultancy now. It's just profit, sweetie. I'm telling you, pure profit." "Cy and I both qualified for Syndicate Stage 6 a few years ago," Jemima confided. "And," Race chipped in, "my lot are rolling out the next-gen upgrades. You know about acuity, right? Terrible fuss, but I must say I'm curious." "Wasn't Lance involved in development?" asked Jemima. "Yeah, I think so. I think he got on board after the divorce. Of course, we've provided similar products to our top clients for years," Rhys carried on. "But rolling out acuity to the more affordable health insurance plans should be interesting. Your lot getting involved then?" Ray had only vaguely heard of the upgrade they were talking about. She'd stopped reading her professional journals years ago. Well, we're not going to be working with that one as yet." "Oh?" "It's complicated. My organisation, we do some pretty niche stuff, Ray could feel her cheeks flushing. "Hey, fuck it. No worries," Rhys cajoled her. "Just work, right? Whatever. How's Nathaniel?" "Yeah, how's he getting along?" "We split a year ago. Turns out he's a douchebag." Jemima scooped a hand through the crook of Ray's arm and huddled into her, concerned. "Have you tried?" her old friend began, but the damp wool of Ray's mind had descended. She lay her hand over her throat and let the pair scoop her along the sidewalk, nodding occasionally and saying, "Yeah," whenever it seemed appropriate. Her thoughts drifted back to her cluster and its missing member. So, Perdita was a rebel, she thought, as the others jabbered away. At least according to corporate security. So bizarre. And kind of impressive. It was hard to get your head round. Of course, the fucking corporations were pinning the whole thing squarely on her. Ray supposed Perdita was involved somehow, but she couldn't see her actually murdering anyone. Which is why I think it's so important to put a little back, right? Rhys was saying something earnest. Ray guessed it was a bit profound, but only a bit. "Yes, I guess it is," she mumbled. "I hadn't thought about it before." Jemima nodded gravely. Cy is actually terribly angry with his mother, which is why he only buys salad off these children from the shanties. Helping them makes him feel better. It's a funny thing, Ray. You remember my brother, Nick? Think so? Blonde beard, black hair? Yeah. Well, it turns out that I'm actually really angry with him. Hadn't realised until a few years ago. I haven't spoken to him since. "It's so good to see you, Ray," said Rhys. "We miss you. How are you? Really?" I don't know. I suppose recently everything's been a bit... Oh, God, one thing I absolutely have to tell you. You remember Jack, right, with the accent? Well, we bumped into each other last year for nearly 2 hours. He thought I was... The next fucking ashram. A piazza banked with restaurants and cafes. The instructor, perched on the low wall of a water fountain, was talking them through the closing steps of their urban yoga session. His face contorted with desperation. Lance didn't think he could hold his python pose around the street lamp much longer. As you breathe in and as you breathe out, remain aware. See your breath blowing through this space, joining the atmosphere, intertwining and connecting you with the concrete, the metal, the glass. Rhys and Jemima made some shapes around a manhole as Ray sidled over to one of the tables outside a cafe and sat down as inconspicuously as she could. She eyed the urban yogis surreptitiously, her fingers tapping her eyeline in a habitual pattern. Cupped in her palm, she projected another episode of Curb Your Kangaroo, the volume turned down low in her implants. Come on, Ray. Sitting here diddling about on that doesn't count as yoga. Philippa was striding over to her. Her old friends were gathering themselves for the next leg. Sorry, Ray swiped and closed the projection. Work thing, kind of urgent. Sure, yeah. All done now. Ray wobbled her head uncertainly. Think so. We're heading back to the hall for some mindful wrestling, said Philippa. You ready? We could grapple together if you want. My mantra is Om Mani Padme Hum. What do you chant? Ray, do you mind turning that off for a bit? Lance shared a glance with a few of the others on the sideline. Rhys and Phil are attempting to take each other down whilst being kind to their wandering minds. They need some peace and quiet. Ray had given up trying to be subtle and was now openly watching TV on her eyeline. Smirking fondly at one character, she shook her head in disbelief. Ray, did you hear me? Give it a break, eh, love? Her old mates were getting concerned. Except the two on the mats. Philippa had just tried a throw of grand amplitude on Rhys, who rolled out of the attack. Both were breathing hard, no doubt observing the difference of temperature between their in-breath and out-breath. The instructor, who was refereeing the bout, had noticed Ray's preoccupation with her eyeline, and the group's increasing preoccupation with her. With a blow of his whistle, he ended the match, naming Philippa the victor. Rhys conceded gallantly, acknowledging his disappointment, but remaining aware of the feeling as a transient phenomena that wouldn't entangle his mind in its distressing minutiae. Okay, guys, the instructor feigned a glance at his eyeline. That would be Miller and Ray up next, then. Let's do this, girls. Miller bounded onto the mats, shook her legs loose, and retied the bun at the back of her head. Ray sat and chuckled at a gag on the show. One of the characters was doing something that was so them. Hilarious. There followed a mutter of distaste from the others. Lance nudged her with his elbow and leaned into her. Hey, come on. You're up. Stop that shit now, eh? She ignored him. Mesmerised, watching the projection in her palm in simple adoration. Ray, what the fuck is wrong with you? Turn that shit off. He went for her eyeline, vaguely prodding somewhere he thought the standby zone might be, and snap. In that instant, Ray turned on him, rabid with rage, spitting and swivel-eyed. "Get off, fucking cunt!" She scrabbled and clawed at his intrusion, banshee foul in her fury. Every muscle ready to snap, Ray tore off across the mats, whining with hate. She stormed past Millie, who looked aghast as Ray sprang her attention upon her. "Salty piss tits!" she spat, and stamped towards the changing rooms, tears streaming down her cheeks, body shaking. Ray wrenched the door open on the far side of the hall and yanked it as hard as she could after her. But the mechanical door prevented its slamming into the frame. The only sound was a slight hiss as it gently placed the door back into position.